It always means something along the border of Georgia and Florida and to those two particular states. But this year, it means the SEC Eastern Division Championship most likely and a possible college football playoff berth after an SEC championship game. We got Palmer Toms on the line from Dogs 247 to help us settle the score on Florida and Georgia. Dogs and Gators, they hate each other, and they have a whole lot to play for here in 2019. Palmer, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on. It's been an exciting week here in Athens, and I think everyone's ready to head down to Jacksonville.
Yeah, it's one of only two that come to mind in regards to neutral site games, in regards to a rivalry that's played each and every week at the same site. Of course, I refer to Oklahoma and Texas as well. For this one in particular, those schools in the SEC Eastern Division at the top of that division have a number of rivalries. When you talk about Tennessee, it's against Florida, it's against Georgia, it's against Alabama. The same holds true for Georgia. You take on Georgia Tech in a few weeks. You got the Florida game. You've got Tennessee as well. What makes this one different, special?
Yeah, I think that, we talked to Kirby Smart earlier this week, and just the unique factor of this isn't played in Athens. It's not played in Gainesville. It's a neutral site. The crowd, with it being 50-50 split, there's not necessarily a huge student section. The players have said, when you're playing at home, you've got the home fans right there. Everyone shows up early to cheer you on in warm-ups. When you're playing on the road, everyone shows up early to boo you in warm-ups. And so, Smart described this as more of a professional atmosphere where you've got that 50-50 split. And it definitely makes for a very unique rivalry, especially when you say, hey, this one's a deciding factor in the SEC East most years.
Now, considering what happened last year, in which it was a tightly contested game up until early fourth quarter, and then the Dogs ran away by 3 scores, considering the recruited talent on each side, but Georgia having a decided advantage, but still obviously elite talent on both sides of the football, and then considering what Georgia has built up to, and this being kind of, I don't want to call it a make or break season, because even if Georgia falters this year, they continue to recruit, and they'll be next year and the year after. But it's been kind of looked at as Georgia's season. Georgia has been the dominant team in the conference, in the division, for the last couple of years. Georgia has been the odds-on favorite to win during the offseason. They've received all the attention. Florida's been kind of that second team. They're up and coming. Dan Mullen's doing a nice job, but it's going to take another year or two before he reaches elite status. But the way the two teams have played, and with Georgia faltering against South Carolina, and Florida, even though they lost by 2 touchdowns at LSU, almost confirmed that they're pretty darn good, and beating Auburn at home, it almost feels like a fairly even game or a toss-up.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, the recruiting rankings obviously favor Georgia. Florida's got 1 5-star on their roster, and that's Brenton Cox, who transferred from Georgia earlier this season during fall camp. And so, like you said, the recruiting definitely factors Georgia. Definitely favors Georgia in that aspect. But like you said, last year was a 3-score game, but Florida held the lead early in the second half. It was a 6-point game. Early in the fourth quarter. The deciding factor really was that Florida turned the ball over 3 times and Georgia didn't. You look at Georgia's loss this year to South Carolina, they turned the ball over, South Carolina didn't. So I think, like you said, these two teams are fairly even, and there's going to be some deciding factor, be it turnovers, be it past couple of years, the team that's dominated on the ground has won the game. Team that's rushed for more yards has won the game. There's going to be some sort of deciding factor because these are 2 fairly even teams. And like you said, Florida, on the rise with Dan Mullen in their second year, made a New Year's Six Bowl last year in his first year. Kirby Smart, this is his 4th year. And like you said, Georgia's been the favorite. The past 2 seasons, Georgia's, proved to be something in the world of college football, and this is a big year for them. And if they want to move on to SEC championship for the 3rd straight year, college football playoff for the 2nd time in 3 years, they're going to have to go through Florida.
And Palmer, it's also going to be a big boys game. We've got Georgia with arguably the best offensive line in the country. Florida leads the SEC in sacks. Florida creating about as many disruptive plays as any defense in the SEC. And of course, Georgia's going to use that offensive line to try to wear down the Florida defense. Florida's going to try to use some speed and athleticism along the front seven to shoot some gaps. DeAndre Swift, obviously one of the best backs in the nation. Sure, they're going to be playmakers on the outside, but it's going to kind of start in the trenches on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, it's exactly what you want to see in a football game when you're watching game that's really won in the trenches, and that's going to be especially the case with Georgia's offense on the field and that offensive line, and Florida's defense on the field and that defensive line. Like you said, they lead the SEC in sacks. They're 8th in the nation in that category with 29 overall, led by former Georgia defensive coordinator Todd Grantham. They're going to want to bring some pressure onto Jake Fromm in the passing game. The pressure is going to be on Andrew Thomas and Isaiah Wilson, Georgia's 2 offensive tackles, to really hold up those edge rushers, Jabari Zuniga and Jonathan Grenard. Those 2 guys were out due to injury for Florida's last game against South Carolina, and they look like they're going to be playing. And with a big rivalry, I'd expect everyone to be playing. Georgia's got some guys that have been banged up, and they're going to be back. All signs point to them being back. And I think, like you said, this is a game that's going to be decided in the trenches. And, I mentioned it earlier, team that's rushed for more yards in the past couple of meetings has won this game. And so I think that favors Georgia. If that statistic is going to continue, that definitely favors Georgia. But with the rushing attack of DeAndre Swift, Brian Harry, and Zamir White, DeAndre Swift ran for over 100 yards last year against the Gators, really, began his late season tear that he went on against Florida and against Kentucky, against Auburn. And so, that kind of started last year in Jacksonville, and we'll see what happens Saturday.
It's no mystery that when teams run the football, that takes pressure off the passing game. It limits the number of passes. You don't become predictable on offense. You're not playing from behind and having to throw on 3rd and long situations. You're just a more effective offense, and the passing game opens up when you can run the ball. But I think this is even more exaggerated for Georgia and their style of offense. 30-0 under Kirby Smart since 2017, at least, when running for at least 4.1 yards per carry. When they fail to do so, they're 0-6. And while we mentioned those Gator gaudy sack numbers, we also need to mention that Georgia leads the nation in the least sacks allowed. But 3 of the 4 sacks came against South Carolina. When we saw on a few of Jake Fromm's interceptions, there was pressure in his face, and he delivered the ball wildly and paid for it. So that is obviously key. If the quarterback can't see where he's throwing, and if he's got grass stains on his back, then that is not a good thing. When you look at the Florida offense, Palmer, and the Georgia defense, Georgia, in the one loss against South Carolina, I saw every play of that game. They played a pretty good game. They gave up the one big play over the top to Brian Edwards. Other than that, they played well. They didn't turn the ball over, though. Your thoughts about the matchup against the Gators?
Well, I'm going to go back and add one thing. Yep. We were talking about Jake Fromm and 3rd down. That's really where Georgia had their success last year. Fromm coming out of last year, very similar situation. Georgia had just lost their game to LSU, had a bye week, and then Fromm comes to Jacksonville and plays one of the best games of his career. Was 7 of 8 on 3rd down. I believe he was 17 of 24 overall, and all 3 of his touchdown passes came on 3rd down. So, like you said, 3rd downs are going to be really important in this game. They were last year, and I would expect them to be this year. As far as Florida's offense, you said, they've got some really talented wide receivers, and it's going to be an incredible matchup between those receivers and Georgia's defense, Georgia's secondary, led by Eric Stokes. Corner, you've got some questions there. DJ Daniel has started the past couple of games, but Tyson Campbell started the first 3. He's been out since week 3 against Arkansas State due to a turf toe injury. Looking like he may be back for this matchup. So we'll see what Kirby Smart and defensive coordinator Dan Lanning decide to do there at the opposite corner, opposite of Eric Stokes. But pressure is going to be on with the Georgia secondary going up against a very, very, very deep Florida wide receiver group.
Yeah, Kadarius Toney, he's been injured this year, but Josh Hammond, Freddie Swain have made big plays in the passing game. Van Jefferson is probably the best of the bunch in regards to play after play after play consistency with 27 catches and 3 touchdowns. Trevon Grimes is getting into the mix. He was one of the top recruited players in the nation a few years ago. But at tight end, Kyle Pitts has 35 catches for Florida. He's one of the best in the business, and he's going to give your linebackers and safeties something to pay attention to.
Yeah, I was going to mention him. We can't forget him, especially considering, watching Georgia really struggle against Notre Dame and Cole Kmet there at tight end. That's been a weakness for the Georgia defense. They really struggled to cover him. Think they've shored up a little bit there. And we talked to Monty Rice earlier this week, one of the Georgia middle linebackers, and he said that, Pitts has been a really big focus for them. But Kirby Smart emphasized it too. He said, this is a really, really talented, one of the most talented tight ends he's seen in a long time. He's big and physical like a tight end, but at the same time, he can play a wide, split out wide receiver type role. So he's really a 50-50 guy there, can block like a tight end, but plays great in space like a wide receiver.
Christmas is coming. Shop Amazon. Grab the link in the description section below next to Amazon, and you help out the channel by doing so, and it doesn't cost you an extra penny, and it's the same shopping experience. Will you make a prediction on your site later in the week? Is that how that works? And we can point.
Yeah, we do a little bit later in the week, but I think what I would say is I think Georgia's getting healthy. Lawrence, graduate wide receiver Lawrence Cager coming back from injury potentially. Like I mentioned, Tyson Campbell. They're getting some other guys either back from injury that have missed some games, or some guys that just have been banged up and got to heal a little bit over the bye week. I think Georgia's getting healthy. This is where we saw them go on a run last year, and what's been impressive to me about Georgia the past 2 seasons is that when they've had their backs against the wall, be it after the loss to Auburn 2 years ago, after the loss to LSU last year, they've gone on runs. They've gone on, really impressive runs. They haven't lost a regular season game after those 2 losses. And so, I think Georgia's probably in good territory here. Like we've said, the talent is, recruiting rankings favor Georgia. I think these are 2 very talented teams, and I think it's going to be a really close game.
All right. Palmer Toms joins us on a regular basis. He covers Georgia football over on 247 Sports. You know the brand. It's well respected. You know that they do a great job of covering every college football team, but specifically Georgia Dogs 247. Right there. You can get my weekly college football predictions, including this one with the Gators and the Dogs. Just grab the link in the description section below next to Voice of College Football Community, 58% against the spread. Palmer, we appreciate you stopping by. Hope you enjoy the game. I know it's going to be a great one.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mark.